The shadows of the Iron Age. In the golden twilight of the Treta Yuga, where the air smelled of sandalwood and the rivers hummed with ancient chants, the great sage Lomasha sat beneath a sprawling banyan tree. Beside him, his youngest student, Arion, watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt perfect, but Lomasha's eyes held the weight of 1,000 years, seeing a future that had not yet arrived. "Master," Arion whispered, sensing the gravity in the air. "The stories say the age of righteousness will not last forever. What comes after the glory of Rama's reign?" Lomasha sighed, his long white beard shimmering like spun silk. He raised a hand, tracing the shape of a great wheel in the air with his fingertip, a shimmering blue light following his movement. Arion watched the glowing wheel spin. He had heard of the yugas, the great cycles of time, but the thought of the world changing frightened him. To him, the Vedas were the breath of the universe, and the truth was as solid as the mountains. He couldn't imagine a world where the light of knowledge would flicker or fade. "A time is coming, Arion, called the Kali Yuga," Lomasha explained, his voice echoing with the depth of a mountain bell. "It is the age of iron, where the foundations of Dharma will crumble. The wheel will turn, and the shadows will grow long. In that age, men will speak of the Vedas, but their hearts will be empty of their true meaning." Arion looked toward the horizon, and for a moment, he saw a vision of the future. He saw grand temples where people gathered, not to pray, but to show off their wealth. He saw leaders who promised peace while sharpening their swords. "Hypocrisy," he murmured, the word feeling heavy on his tongue like bitter fruit. Lomasha nodded slowly. "Indeed, in the Kali Yuga, the mask will become more important than the face. Men will call themselves holy while harboring greed in their souls. The sacred hymns will be chanted for gold and fame, and the deep wisdom of the ancestors will be forgotten in favor of shallow cleverness." Arion felt a sudden weight on his limbs, as if invisible chains were wrapping around him. "Is there no escape, Master? Will everyone be trapped in this web of lies and worldly desire?" He reached out, his fingers brushing the grass, which suddenly felt less like life and more like a tether holding him down to the earth. Lomasha placed a firm, steadying hand on Arion's shoulder. The touch was warm and grounded, breaking the chill of the vision. "The world will become a place of bondage, Arion. People will tie their happiness to things that break, and people who leave. They will build prisons out of their own attachments and call it security. But remember this," the sage continued, his voice rising in power. "To break the bonds of Kali Yuga, one must look inward. When the world outside is dark, the soul must become its own sun. The Vedas do not live in books, but in the breath of the seeker. To live in truth when everyone lies, that is the highest sacrifice." As the first stars appeared in the sky, the vision of the dark age faded. The forest was peaceful once more. Lomasha and Arion stood together, two figures against the vastness of time. The Kali Yuga was coming, but for those who carried the light within, the dawn would always be waiting. In the golden twilight of the Treta Yuga, where the air smelled of sandalwood and the rivers hummed with ancient chants, the great sage Lomasha sat beneath a sprawling banyan tree. Beside him, his youngest student, Arion, watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt perfect, but Lomasha's eyes held the weight of 1,000 years, seeing a future where the light of Dharma would grow dim. "Master," Arion whispered, sensing the gravity in the air. "The stories say the age of righteousness will not last forever. What comes after the glory of Rama's reign?" Lomasha sighed, his long white beard shimmering like spun silk. He raised a hand, tracing the shape of a great wheel in the air with his fingertip, a shimmering blue light following his movement as he began to speak of the final age, Kali Yuga. Arion watched the glowing wheel spin, feeling a cold shiver. He had heard of the yugas, the great cycles of time, but the master's vision felt terrifyingly real. To Arion, the Vedas were the breath of the universe, and truth was as solid as the mountains. He couldn't imagine a world where the light of knowledge would flicker or be discarded like old rags. A time is coming, Arion, where greed will be the only god men worship, Lomasha explained, his voice echoing like a mountain bell. In the Kali Yuga, wealth alone will define a person's worth. High birth and wisdom will mean nothing. Men will lie for a single coin, and the powerful will exploit the weak, building glittering cities on foundations of selfishness. Arion looked toward the horizon, and a vision of the social decline flickered before his eyes. He saw children who no longer respected their elders, and families broken by petty arguments over land and gold. Will the bonds of love vanish, Master? He asked. Lomasha nodded sadly, describing a world where people would abandon their parents and friends as soon as they were no longer useful. The very strength of humanity will wither, Lomasha continued. In our time, men live for centuries, sustained by virtue. But in the age of iron, their bodies will be frail and their lifespans brief. Disease will haunt them from youth, and few will see their 50th year. They will be small in stature and smaller in spirit, driven by frantic desires they can never satisfy. Arion felt a sudden weight on his limbs, as if invisible chains were wrapping around him. But what of the gods? What of the prayers? He cried. Lomasha spoke of the loss of religion. Temples will remain, but they will be empty shells. People will perform rituals only for show, seeking fame rather than the divine. The sacred hymns will be forgotten, replaced by the noise of the marketplace. Lomasha placed a firm, steadying hand on Arion's shoulder. The touch was warm and grounded, breaking the chill of the dark prophecy. The world will become a place of bondage, Arion. People will tie their happiness to things that break and call it security. They will be slaves to their senses, forever hungry, forever thirsty, forgetting the peace that lies in stillness. But remember this, the sage continued, his voice rising in power. To break the bonds of Kali Yuga, one must look inward. When the world outside is dark, the soul must become its own sun. In that age, even the simplest act of truth, or a single sincere prayer, will carry the weight of 1,000 sacrifices. To live in virtue, when everyone else has abandoned it, that is the path of the hero. As the first stars appeared in the sky, the vision of the dark age faded. The forest was peaceful once more, the air still sweet with the scent of the banyan. Lomasha and Arion stood together, two figures against the vastness of time. The Kali Yuga was coming, but for those who carried the light of Dharma within, the dawn would always be waiting. In the golden twilight of the Treta Yuga, where the air smelled of sandalwood and the rivers hummed with ancient chants, the great sage Lomasha sat beneath a sprawling banyan tree. Beside him, his youngest student, Arion, watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt perfect, but Lomasha's eyes held the weight of 1,000 years, seeing a future where the light of Dharma would grow dim. Master, Arion whispered, sensing the gravity in the air. The stories say the age of righteousness will not last forever. What comes after the glory of Rama's reign? Lomasha sighed, his presence as steady as the mountains. He raised a hand, tracing the shape of a great wheel in the air with his fingertip, a shimmering blue light following his movement as he began to speak of the final age, Kali Yuga. Arion watched the glowing wheel spin, feeling a cold shiver. He had heard of the yugas, the great cycles of time, but the master's vision felt terrifyingly real. To Arion, the Vedas were the breath of the universe, and truth was as solid as the mountains. He couldn't imagine a world where the light of knowledge would flicker or be discarded like old rags. A time is coming, Arion, where greed will be the only god men worship, Lomasha explained, his voice echoing like a mountain bell. In the Kali Yuga, wealth alone will define a person's worth. High birth and wisdom will mean nothing. Men will lie for a single coin, and the powerful will exploit the weak, building glittering cities on foundations of selfishness. The harmony of the home will shatter, the master continued. Women of high status, who once held the grace of the goddess, will lose their inner and outer purity. They will speak with harsh, vulgar tongues and forget the cleanliness of spirit. Disregarding the wishes of their households, they will act with defiance, turning their backs on those who love them to follow their own prideful paths. The very strength of humanity will wither, Lomasha continued. In our time, men live for centuries, sustained by virtue. But in the age of iron, their bodies will be frail and their lifespans brief. Disease will haunt them from youth, and few will see their 50th year. They will be small in stature and smaller in spirit, driven by frantic desires they can never satisfy. Even the seekers of truth will stumble, Lomasha said, his voice turning stern. Monks who should seek the silence of the forest will be bound by heavy worldly ties. They will not seek the divine, but will gather disciples out of a base greed for food and comfort. The sacred path will become a tool for their own hunger, and the quiet of the soul will be lost to the noise of their appetites. Lomasha placed a firm, steadying hand on Arion's shoulder. The touch was warm and grounded, breaking the chill of the dark prophecy. The world will become a place of bondage, Arion. People will tie their happiness to things that break and call it security. They will be slaves to their senses, forever hungry, forgetting the peace that lies in stillness. But remember this, the sage continued, his voice rising in power. To break the bonds of Kali Yuga, one must look inward. When the world outside is dark, the soul must become its own sun. In that age, even the simplest act of truth, or a single sincere prayer, will carry the weight of 1,000 sacrifices. To live in virtue, when everyone else has abandoned it, that is the path of the hero. As the first stars appeared in the sky, the vision of the dark age faded. The forest was peaceful once more, the air still sweet with the scent of the banyan. Lomasha and Arion stood together, two figures against the vastness of time. The Kali Yuga was coming, but for those who carried the light of Dharma within, the dawn would always be waiting. The air grew heavy as a new figure approached the great banyan tree. It was the venerable Muni Sutaji, a master of the Puranas, whose eyes carried the wisdom of all eras. Lomasha stood to greet him, his face etched with the grim visions of the coming Kali Yuga. Together they looked upon young Arion, who sat trembling at the thought of a world where even the prayers of men would become hollow and deceitful. Muni Sutaji, Lomasha began, his voice low and urgent. I have seen the hypocrisy that will stain the final age. I see men who wear the marks of devotees on their brows, but harbor daggers in their hearts. They will recite the holy verses to gain power, using the divine as a mask for their own pride. In such an age of masked faces and clouded consciences, is there any hope remaining? Arion felt a pang of despair. He looked at his own hands, wondering if the very purity he sought would one day be corrupted. Master, he asked Sutaji, if the darkness is so deep that it enters the temples and the hearts of the seekers themselves, how can anyone find the way out? If our very thoughts become our enemies, who will save us from ourselves? Sutaji closed his eyes, and for a moment the sound of the wind seemed to transform into a rhythmic chant. It is the greatest mystery of the Iron Age, Sutaji replied. When virtue is lost and the mind is a storm of sin, human effort alone is like a broken reed. We must invoke the one whose name is the Taraka mantra, the boat that carries souls across the ocean of delusion. We must call upon Lord Sri Ram. As Sutaji spoke the name of Rama, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive weight of the Kali Yuga visions began to lift, replaced by a scent of fresh rain and forest flowers. Arion felt a strange warmth in his chest. Lord Ram is the Maryada Purushottama, Sutaji whispered. His grace does not wait for us to be perfect. It descends to find us precisely because we are lost. In his mind's eye, Sutaji saw the magnificent form of the Lord, standing with his mighty bow, Kodanda. This was not a warrior of war, but a guardian of the soul. Rama's eyes were filled with a compassion so vast it could swallow all the sins of the world. Even for the most hypocritical soul, one sincere cry of his name could shatter the chains of 1,000 lifetimes. But how? Lomasha asked, seeking the path for the future generations. How can a soul clouded by the filth of Kali Yuga ever satisfy the divine? Sutaji smiled, and the golden light around him intensified. The divine is not satisfied by rituals or wealth in that age, Lomasha. He is captured by the bhava, the raw, honest cry of a heart that realizes its own brokenness. Ramanama is the bridge built of mercy. Sutaji turned back to Arion, his voice resonating with power. In the age of iron, the name of Rama is the only light that does not flicker. It acts like a fire that consumes the hypocrisy of the devotee. When a sinful soul utters it, the sound vibrates through the conscience, clearing the clouds of greed and ego until the inner sun shines once more. Arion closed his eyes and saw a vision of a man named Kalmash, whose soul was draped in heavy black chains of his own making. As Kalmash whispered the sacred name, the chains began to glow, turning into flower garlands that fell away. The man's face, once twisted with malice, smoothed into a look of profound, tearful relief as he stepped out of the shadows. The prophecy was complete. The Kali Yuga would be dark, and the path would be narrow, but the map had been revealed. Lomasha, Sutaji, and Arion stood under the starlight, knowing that no matter how deep the corruption of the world, the simple, powerful name of Sri Ram would always be the key to the gates of salvation. The Iron Age had its shadows, but the light of the name was eternal. The air grew heavy as a new figure approached the great banyan tree. It was the venerable Muni Sutaji, a master of the Puranas, whose eyes carried the wisdom of all eras. Lomasha stood to greet him, his face etched with the grim visions of the coming Kali Yuga. Together they looked upon young Arion, who sat trembling at the thought of a world where even the prayers of men would become hollow and deceitful. Muni Sutaji, Lomasha began, his voice low and urgent. I have seen the hypocrisy that will stain the final age. I see men who wear the marks of devotees on their brows, but harbor daggers in their hearts. They will recite holy verses to gain power, using the divine as a mask for their own pride. In such an age of masked faces and clouded consciences, is there any hope remaining? Arion felt a pang of despair. He looked at his own hands, wondering if the very purity he sought would one day be corrupted. Master, he asked Sutaji, if the darkness is so deep that it enters the hearts of the seekers themselves, how can anyone find the way out? If our very thoughts become our enemies, who will save us from ourselves? Sutaji's expression turned radiant. There is a path, Arion. I shall reveal to you the Ramayana, he declared. This epic was first sung by Mahatma Narada to the Sanya Kumar sages. It is not merely a story, but the very essence of the Vedas brought to earth. It was designed specifically to be the destroyer of sins and the anchor for souls lost in the stormy sea of Kali Yuga. This sacred text is the ultimate medicine, Sutaji continued, turning to Arion. It is a complete Vedic scripture that offers the keys to both worldly enjoyment and ultimate salvation. It does not ask you to hide from the world, but shows you how to live within it with a heart of gold. Through the pastimes of Lord Rama, the path to redemption is made clear to everyone. In an age of hypocrisy, the Ramayana acts as the destroyer of sorrows, Sutaji explained to Lomasha. It washes away the stains of the mind as easily as a river carries away dust. Every verse is a drop of nectar for a thirsty soul. It is the only light that does not flicker when the winds of the Iron Age howl. As Sutaji spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive weight of the Kali Yuga visions began to lift, replaced by the scent of forest flowers. Lord Rama is the Maryada Purushottama, Sutaji whispered to Arion. His grace does not wait for us to be perfect. It descends to find us precisely because we are lost. His story is the bridge built of pure mercy. Lomasha watched as the fear left the young boy's eyes. So the Ramayana is the hope we seek? He asked. Sutaji nodded. In the age of iron, the name and story of Rama are the only things that cannot be corrupted. It acts like a fire that consumes hypocrisy. When a soul hears these pastimes, the sound vibrates through the conscience, clearing the clouds of ego until the inner sun shines. Arion closed his eyes and saw a vision of a man named Kalmash, whose soul was draped in heavy black chains. As Kalmash heard the sacred deeds of Rama, the chains began to glow, turning into flower garlands that fell away. The man's face, once twisted with malice, smoothed into a look of profound, tearful relief as he stepped out of the shadows. The revelation was complete. The Kali Yuga would be dark, but the map of the Ramayana had been revealed. Sutaji and Arion stood under the starlight, knowing that no matter how deep the corruption of the world, the simple, powerful pastimes of Sri Ram would always be the key to salvation. The Iron Age had its shadows, but the light of the story was eternal. Under the sprawling canopy of the ancient banyan tree, Muni Sutaji turned his gaze toward young Arion. "Do not let the darkness of the coming age chill your spirit, child," Sutaji said, his voice resonating like a temple bell. "I bring a secret that can pierce the thickest gloom of the Kali Yuga. It is the Ramayana, not merely a tale of kings, but a celestial power capable of washing away the heaviest burdens of the soul." Lomasha watched as the sage's aura intensified. "Is it true, Muni Sutaji?" Lomasha asked. "Can a single story stand against the hypocrisy of the Iron Age?" Sutaji nodded, holding out his hands as if cupping an invisible flame. "The Ramayana is the ultimate nectar, Lomasha. It is the distilled essence of all wisdom. Just as a drop of honey can sweeten the bitterest brew, these sacred verses can turn a life of sorrow into a fountain of grace." "Even for those who have stumbled?" Arion whispered, thinking of the many mistakes he feared making. Sutaji looked at him with infinite compassion. "Especially for them, Arion. Even a soul weighed down by the darkest sins finds purity the moment they truly listen to Rama's journey. The sound of his name acts like a sacred fire, burning away the dross of the past and leaving only the diamond glint of the true self behind." Lomasha stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "You speak of the 4 great goals of life, Sutaji. How does this story lead us there?" Sutaji smiled. "It is the roadmap, Lomasha. Through the character of Rama, the path to Dharma, or duty, becomes as clear as a sunlit road. It shows us how to act when the world demands we compromise our truth, providing the strength to stand firm." Sutaji turned back to Arion, the light in his eyes growing even brighter. "And for those who seek success and joy, the Ramayana reveals the path to Artha and Kama, prosperity and desire. It teaches that when our desires are aligned with Rama's grace, they no longer bind us. They become the very tools we use to serve the world and find true fulfillment without greed." "But the greatest gift," Sutaji continued, "is moksha, liberation. By immersing oneself in these verses, the heart is cleansed of every lingering shadow of past mistakes. This inner purity allows the soul to fly free from the cycle of birth and death, returning to the source of all light." He gestured toward the horizon, where a vision of a man named Kalmash appeared, his heavy chains turning to stardust. Arion felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "I feel as if a weight is lifting just by hearing you speak," he said. Lomasha nodded in agreement. "As the heart is cleansed," Sutaji explained to them both, "devotion to Rama grows like a seedling in spring. It starts as a tiny spark and grows into a roaring flame of love that no wind of the Kali Yuga can ever extinguish." "The Kali Yuga will try to corrupt the mind with doubt and deceit," Sutaji warned, looking up at the darkening sky. "But the Ramayana will be your beacon. It is a lighthouse standing tall against a sea of iron and stone. No matter how deep the shadows of the age become, the light of this story remains eternal, guiding the faithful back to the shore of righteousness." "Listening is the key," Sutaji told Lomasha. "When the sacred verses enter the ears, they vibrate through the very core of one's being. This sound medicine heals the wounds of the conscience." It is the bridge built of pure mercy that allows the common man to walk among the gods, untouched by the decay of the world around him. The stars seemed to pulse in time with Sutaji's words. Arion no longer felt the tremor of fear. He looked at Lomasha and Sutaji, knowing that he held the greatest treasure of all. The Iron Age might bring its shadows, but with the Ramayana as his map and the name of Rama as his shield, the path to salvation was open to all who dared to believe. Under the ancient banyan tree, Muni Sutaji's eyes burned with a prophetic fire. "Listen closely, Arion," he whispered as the wind began to howl. "The Kali Yuga approaches, a time when truth will be hidden behind masks of greed, and the world will grow heavy with hypocrisy. It is an age where men will chase hollow shadows, forgetting the light of their own souls." Lomasha frowned, looking at the swirling dust. "If the world is to become so dark, Muni Sutaji, what hope is there for the common man? Will we all be swallowed by the distractions of this Iron Age?" Sutaji shook his head. "Only those who lose their way, Lomasha. For the devoted, there is a sanctuary that no shadow can penetrate, the eternal verses of the Ramayana." In a vision of the future, a man named Vitas stood in a bustling marketplace, his eyes wide with a feverish hunger. He ignored the sunrise, instead chasing after a merchant who held a box of shimmering, useless trinkets. Vitas was trapped, his mind spinning with the need for more, his spirit distracted by the meaningless noise of the crowd. "This is the trap of the Kali Yuga," Sutaji explained to Arion. "People will trade their peace for pebbles, but look at those who choose a different path." He gestured toward the horizon. "The Ramayana acts as a spiritual shield. It is a fortress of sound that vibrates with the power of Rama's name, guarding the heart against the poison of the age." Arion shivered as a cold mist rolled in. "I fear the cycle of time, Sutaji. I fear growing old and the end that waits for us all." Suddenly, a looming shadow named Hara, the personification of old age, stepped from the mist, reaching out with withered, claw-like hands. Arion recoiled, seeing the inevitability of the physical world's decay. But then, a humble man named Dionys stepped forward, reciting the sacred verses with a steady voice. As the name of Rama left his lips, a barrier of light erupted around him. Mara, the shadow of death, lunged from the darkness, but the shield held firm. Dionys remained calm, his devotion turning the fear of death into a distant whisper. Sutaji watched the vision with a smile. "See, Arion? By listening to the epic, Dionys is no longer a prisoner of his flesh. The sacred story cleanses the blood and the bone. He is being transformed into a saint, his consciousness rising above the fear of birth and the sorrow of old age." The contrast was stark. While Vitas sat in the dirt, weeping over his broken trinkets and the weight of his sins, Dionys walked past him, untouched by the chaos. Vitas was bound by heavy, iron chains of his own making, while Dionys moved with the grace of the wind, his spirit lightened by the nectar of the Ramayana. "The epic is not just a book, Lomasha," Sutaji said, placing a hand on the traveler's arm. "It is a bridge to the divine. When you listen to Rama's journey, you are drinking from the fountain of immortality. It washes away the grime of the Kali Yuga and replaces it with a diamond-like clarity that can never be shattered." As the first light of dawn finally broke through the storm, Arion stood tall. The prophecies of the Dark Age no longer frightened him. He looked at Sutaji and Lomasha, his heart filled with the verses of the epic. With the Ramayana as his shield and the name of Rama in his soul, he was ready to face any age, transformed and free.